Welcome to a candidate forum for Rocky River Municipal Court, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland, Bay Village, and Westlake North Olmsted chapters. My name is Nadia Zain, and I am one of the co-chairs for the Westlake North Olmsted chapter. I want to first thank all of our candidates for agreeing to participate tonight. The League is a nonpartisan organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences policy through education and advocacy. Candidate forums such as these are an important part of that mission. Please note that this forum is being live streamed and recorded, and we will be on our YouTube page and our Facebook pages following the forum. Our moderator this evening is Pam Smith from the Lakewood chapter. Pam has been a member since 2014, and she is an experienced forum moderator. So I will turn it over to Pam to moderate this forum.
Thanks a lot, Nadia. That must be 2014 since the Greater Cleveland League was formed, because I've been a league member for 40 years. It's a pleasure for me to be here, to see all of you in the audience. We expect to hear a lot of information.
Sorry, I think I wasn't talking directly. Make sure.
Okay, I think it's turned on now. Thank you. Is the mic reading properly? Okay, good. Can everyone in the back hear? Good. I have a mic, and then the candidates are going to share a mic here. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Rocky River Municipal Court, because of course it's much bigger than Rocky River. Just an overview of municipal courts. There are more than 120 municipal courts and mayor's courts in Ohio. The municipal courts hear cases involving traffic, non-traffic misdemeanors, violation of municipal ordinances, evictions, and civil claims that are $15,000 or less. Municipal court judges must be attorneys with at least 6 years of experience in the practice of law. The workload of municipal courts varies widely. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because it may spark a question. And you can raise your hand, get a card to ask a question of these judges, and it will come up during our question. The cities in the Rocky River Municipal Court District are Bay Village, Fairview Park, North Olmsted, Rocky River, Westlake, and the Cleveland Metroparks. Municipal judges serve terms of 6 years. It's been a difficult time financially for many courts. COVID has led to different outcomes in many places. There's been a change in court volume that you may hear about or ask about. Since 2019, there's been a 31% decrease in the number of cases and a 37% decrease in court revenue, producing several years of deficits that have not happened in the past. Tonight, we're going to hear from 3 candidates. They will each have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Our timers are here at the front. They will tell the candidates at 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and then the all-important stop. After they each have their 2-minute statement, we will go into questions and answers. And this is perhaps one of the most interesting part of a candidate forum, because there's hardly any other meeting where you would be able to ask so many questions. You might hear somebody talk at a Chamber of Commerce meeting, but there wouldn't be the ability to ask questions. So this is your time to ask questions. The questions can be directed to one of the candidates, and I would then ask that candidate first, but the other candidates will always have the opportunity to also chime in with their response. Then, okay, do you have any questions? Without further ado, we're going to start our meeting tonight. This candidate forum will start in alphabetical order with the opening statements, and we'll reverse it for the closing statement. So, Mr. Burke,
Yeah.
can you use,
May I address on the podium?
no, we're gonna have
Okay.
everyone stay down here.
All right, very good, thank you. Members of the League of Women Voters, guests and voters, thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you this evening. It is an honor standing before you as candidate for judge, seeking your support and trust. I want to begin by emphasizing the significant part of my identity that has profoundly shaped my perspective. I'm a proud father and a husband. As a father to three wonderful but unique daughters, Jillian graduated from Denison, where I went this year. Eva, who's going to graduate from Ohio State this year, and her youngest, Rennie, who's a middle schooler at Rocky River, and a husband, loyal, successful, independent woman. I've had the privilege of observing the strength, resilience, and boundless potential that women possess. My experiences as a dad and a husband have profoundly influenced my justice, fairness, and equality under the law. When I look at my daughters, I'm reminded every day of the world we're building for them and for all women. I believe in a justice system that is not only impartial and just, but is also compassionate and forward-thinking. It's a system that recognizes that progress is not simply about the laws we uphold. It's about instilling in our children values, because one day they're going to be parents. My family's taught me the importance of empathy, understanding, and compromise, qualities I will bring to the bench if I'm fortunate enough to have been voted by you. My wife and I have strived to create a home where my daughters feel safe, they feel valued, and they feel empowered to reach their dreams, whatever they might be. And I want to bring that same spirit of inclusivity and support to the courtroom, ensuring that anybody walks in will feel heard and respected. Is that all I have left? Okay.
Yeah.
So I have been a magistrate for 5 years at the court. I'd love to hear your questions. I'm so excited about being here. I served under Judge Hagan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Thomas J. Kelly. I too am a candidate for Rocky River Municipal Court Judge. I would first like to begin by thanking the League of Women Voters and the North Olmsted branch of the Cuyahoga County Public Library for hosting this. And thank you all for coming out and taking time out of your evening to listen to this. I'd like to begin with my own why. And my why as to why I'm running for judge is people. It's about people, it's about service, it's about being a public servant. And basically what I intend to do, if I am elected, is to ensure that everyone who comes before the court is treated with dignity and respect. I know it's a simple ask, but in terms of how it plays out in the real world, I can tell you from personal experience the difference equality jurists can make in terms of outcomes, not only for the individual case before the court, but for the community at large. I wouldn't be here this evening as well without the support of my family. My wife, Sarah, who's kind enough to come here this evening, is a public high school teacher and has taught me and our children, Grace and Jack, quite a bit. But it is the combination that she and I have brought together in terms of how we raised our family and the values we've tried to instill that have brought me here today. So beyond that, and hoping to talk about my family when we get into it later with your questions, I'd like to talk just briefly about my own professional experience. I'm the only candidate on this dais who can say they've been a prosecutor, a public defender, an assistant law director, and have stood before voters previously, as I'm presently a Bay Village councilman at large when I was elected in 2019. The 10 years as a prosecutor, the 4 years as a public defender, the 2 years as an assistant law director, and 4 years as a legislator allow me a unique perspective. And I hope to be able to get into that and bring that to the bench if elected. Thank you, Thomas J. Kelly.
Thank you. And Ms. Kraus?
Hi, good evening. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this lovely event.
Hold that closer a little bit.
Sure. I'm pretty familiar with this library. I've actually worked here at one point. I have a record of public service, having worked not only as a lawyer, juggling raising a family and working as a lawyer and working in the library system for the past 22 years. I've raised 3 wonderful children, 2 daughters, 1 son. They all are close by, and we're all a very close family. I couldn't be doing this without their support. I am uniquely qualified for this role because I already work at the court. I'm a magistrate there. I started as a civil magistrate for Judge Fitzsimmons 7 years ago. And then, and managed her civil docket, and then became the civil magistrate for Judge Hagan as well. So at this point, I oversee all the civil cases at the court. That means civil trials, civil evictions, and the small claims cases. I'm also a criminal magistrate for Judge Fitzsimmons, so I handle arraignment dockets for her. And I do several dockets a month and do criminal pretrials, traffic, and any kind of hearing that would come forward. It's been a great honor to work with those judges, and I've learned a lot from them. This is a really run court. We already have a great legacy here. Judge Fitzsimmons was there for 30-some years. She was fabulous, and I have learned at her knee, basically. And I would like to continue her legacy while working with Judge Hagan and the probation department and the fabulous court staff. And, but expand. I have ideas for the court. I want to increase the technology and access to the court. I want to increase even more, going more into our programs for mental health. We have a great partnership with the Cleveland Drug Court, the Larry Jones Drug Court, and our goal at court is not only to deter but to rehabilitate. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's now time for our questions and answers. Please continue to write down questions. I have some in my hand here. They're all on different topics. We won't do any duplication, but there's a lot of room to ask questions and learn the answers from these candidates. Starting with Mr. Burke, and then continuing down, and then I'll change who starts with the next question. Mr. Burke, how many cases have you tried as an attorney, and how would that experience make you a better judge?
Thank you. I've tried, I'm a trial attorney, so I've tried approximately 20 cases in my career. I've tried probably of those cases, 7 or 8 have been a jury trial. 2 have been in front of Judge Fitzsimmons. In fact, I had her reversed and vacated in State versus Times. I tried 2 jury trials in front of her. I think it's important that a judge has tried cases, because a judge will have to preside over a jury trial and a bench trial and make evidentiary rulings. It's like a surgeon. How can you hire a surgeon if they've never done the exact surgery?
Excuse me, but could you use the microphone?
Oh, okay.
I can hear you well, but perhaps not people in the back.
If a judge hasn't had any trial experience, it's like a surgeon asking them to operate. They've never operated before. How could you possibly do that? So I think it's critical. It's also critical to an understanding of what litigants have been through, the civil rules, the criminal rules, a basic understanding of the law. And I think judges absolutely have to have that kind of experience. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you for the question. How many cases have I tried? I started right out of law school as an assistant prosecuting attorney for Cuyahoga County. In my first 3 years, I had 25 jury trials doing criminal felony work, up to and including I worked on a couple of murders. So as lead counsel, we're still probably talking over 20, and that was 20 years ago. Since that time, I have prosecuted and defended OVIs, domestic violence, thefts, all the kinds of cases that are heard in the municipal court numerous times throughout Northeast Ohio. I'm very well versed in this area and very comfortable with it. And that comfort translates into an ability to render decisions quickly and effectively, and to work well with the litigators, because I understand the position the advocates have been in. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kraus?
Well, as a magistrate for the past 7 years, I've actually presided over every kind of case in the court. But prior to that, I probably tried maybe 20 cases, because I would count eviction hearings as trials, because they basically are. My first criminal traffic case that I ever tried was also before Judge Fitzsimmons, interesting enough. But we did not appeal that. However, I have done other civil trials, eviction cases, and personal injury. I did a lot of personal injury work earlier in my career, and so that's where more of my trial work was.
Thank you. I would ask all the candidates to speak directly into the mic And although I'm asking the questions, I'm not a voter for the municipal court. These are the voters, so face this way, please. Thank you very much. The next question, starting with Mr. Kelly, is, do you have a memorable case that you have been part of?
I have more than a few, but a minute is not nearly enough time to review it. One of the most memorable cases I have, and one of the things I'm actually the proudest of, is I worked on a murder case where the lead attorney and I worked the case so hard, we discovered that the accused did not in fact commit the crime. And we worked the case so hard that we were able to go back when we were on the verge of starting the case and uncovering the fact that there was another individual in prison for another violent offense who was in fact the killer. That, as you might imagine, gave me a very unique insight into how important it is that everyone works to their maximum potential to ensure that justice is done, to ensure that we get the best outcome that we possibly can. Beyond that, the only time I tried a criminal case with my dad was in 2008 in front of Judge Fitzsimmons. We got a not guilty as a defense, and that was fun. Thank you.
Okay, well, that case sounded right out of television. Ms. Kelly, can you cite a memorable case you've been involved in?
Probably when I would, back to personal injury days, I would say that was probably the most memorable cases. I had a client that was severely injured in an accident. The liability was a little questionable. And that case was pretty early on in my career, and it just when I'd gone out on my own, and I covered that. That case took over 2 years to litigate, and we had got a really good result for her. And I felt that it was she needed the money. It was that she had a terrible family situation. So that case is memorable to me because it seemed to really improve her life, although she'd had so many injuries, and it had been a terrible case for her.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Kelly, or Mr. Burke.
Thank you. I've argued successfully 3 cases in the Ohio Supreme Court, and you say, what does that mean? Well, they take less than 4% of the cases. But the case that stands out is Guadalupe. It was an OVI case. They denied a motion to suppress because they said I didn't state enough facts. And I appealed that, and it went to the Ohio Supreme Court. And the issue was, how much facts do you have to put in a motion to suppress for all criminal motions? And the court found it in my favor. I lost in the trial court, lost in the Court of Appeals. And it was the most significant holding in the last 25 years because it offered due process to all defendants so that certain courts, if they didn't want to have hearings, couldn't deny these anymore. And the other cases were significant really because what I did was create new law that benefits all citizens. I'm really proud of those 3 cases. So.
Thank you very much. Could you please let us know what OVI stands for?
It's operating a vehicle under the influence, or in the old days, we used to call it DUI, driving under the influence.
Okay, thank you. Starting with Ms. Kraus, what diversion tools do you have to avoid incarceration for drug and alcohol issues?
Oh, we have several, and it is, the state drug and alcohol issues, especially alcohol issues, carry mandatory jail sentences. So, but they can do a 3-day program. You have to think about a lecture series if it's a first or charge under a local code, and that would be a series where they would just come to the court. And there'd be a training kind of class where they would not have to serve their 3 days in jail. And I'm talking on the first operating a vehicle under the influence. As far as drug cases, we have a partnership with the Larry Jones Drug Court. Last year we had 22 people referred to it, and this year we have 27. We're hosting the graduation. That's one of our most valuable options, to have people be treated and go through rehab instead of going to jail or incarceration. And there's also jail reduction, which is another way of treating people and then reducing their jail time during that period.
Thank you. Mr. Burke, I think there's a press card here to be picked up. Mr. Burke, what would you think you would recommend as diversion tools?
Well, first of all, as magistrate at the court, and by the way, I've done about 1,000 OVI defense cases in my career, most of them Rocky River. A defendant has to qualify for diversion, which means they don't have a prior criminal record. And certain offenses are not divertible. Crimes of violence are not. Theft, the victim has to consent. So at the court, the diversion cases we had were for driving under suspension diversions. We would have criminal diversions. We had a lot of underage drinking, kids in college. We got them into diversion. So we had those sorts of programs. And really, it's for first-time offenders who have no prior record. And we want to encourage everyone to get a first chance. But let me just say this, North Olmsted has a policy, theft cases are not diversionable because they have so many theft cases, the prosecutor won't even offer that. So these are all the tools that were there at the courts. And just a good judge has to know when somebody's applicable and when somebody's not, but we always try to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. What diversion tools do you have for drug and alcohol issues?
Thank you. You're left with the tools that my opponents have already described in some detail because it amounts to what programs are available through the court. So the question is how and when can you apply them? And at the moment, they are limited in the fashion that my colleagues up here have already shared. So the question is, how can we expand upon them? How can we better identify other individuals who might benefit from these programs? I can tell you from my years as a public defender that I encountered individuals who were not immediately identified. If somebody doesn't self-identify as having a case that might somehow be related to one of these issues, whether a mental health issue, a substance abuse issue, or a dual diagnosis problem, they're not going to be considered in that fashion. So if we're going to try to attach the best solutions possible to the issues at hand, there needs to be additional resources put in place to try to identify those individuals so that we can get those outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. Starting with Mr. Burke. What background, experience, of knowledge do you have that will empower you to help families experiencing domestic violence to stop the cycle of abuse and recover from the trauma and stay together? Families.
Thank you. First of all, let me, OVI cases and domestic violence cases are not divertible. I have represented victims my entire life in my civil practice. Victims of sexual abuse, victims of age discrimination, senior elder abuse cases, landlord-tenant law. And so I really made a career out of representing victims. And by the way, that's the most serious offense that we see at Rocky River Court. There's some horrific cases. And yes, it's a misdemeanor, but it's this close to a felony. So what the tools we have for family is they do have a domestic violence advocate. We had one even before Karen showed up, who meets with the victim regularly, addresses the victim, advises them of their rights. So that's really important because victims really, many are recalcitrant after they make the charge because they realize how this is affecting the family. It truly is an issue that we take very seriously at the court, domestic violence.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly, what background or knowledge do you have that will empower you to help families experiencing domestic violence?
In addition to having prosecuted hundreds of DV cases, I've also had the difficult challenge of doing defense work on these matters. And sometimes they're related to divorce, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they lead to divorce. And sometimes even when they should lead to divorce, they don't. My experience helping families in crisis lets me know that it's important to try to ferret out when we have issues in terms of the power dynamic. Oftentimes there are people who will not take the right steps they need in order to make sure that everyone is safe and healthy because of financial reasons, because of emotional abuse. There is an important need to have a good relationship with Domestic Violence Advocacy Center, to try to work with people, to try to make sure that everyone is safe and healthy. That's where TPOs come in, temporary protection orders, and that's where it's important to have that experience from having worked with families.
Ms. Kraus?
Yes, domestic violence those cases are the most troubling cases we see because it's family members who are in the situation. They often don't want the person removed from the home, even though it's a danger to them. We have a victims advocate, actually a salaried victims advocate at this point. It started out as a grant. We still have a grant for high risk victims advocates who help the victims that are at high risk with the more severe cases. These cases are more like social work. We're trying to get the defendants to get treatment. They need treatment for their anger, sometimes their mental health. They need to they want the family to get back together. They need to work on that. And then the victims also have to get their own counseling as well. So the family unit can be reunited if needed, and the parties can be kept apart with their restraining order if needed as well. So the protection order, I mean.
Thank you. Starting with Mr. Kelly, what do you feel is the best way to handle neighbor disputes that escalate into lawsuits?
Oh. Do I have to go first? Having worked as a prosecutor, having worked as a defense attorney, I can tell you that this is, while it is not necessarily the most egregious area, it is the most difficult, troublesome area to work through. Why? Because you're living next door to each other. And absent one of you making a decision to move, you will continue to live next door to each other. And so if one party or the other can't find a way to reasonably live in peace or tolerate those things that they don't like about their neighbor, it is an incredible challenge. There's efforts at mediation, sometimes done informally before there's any court filing, sometimes after a court filing proceeds. What you end up having is, if everything else fails, you end up looking at either there ends up being issues with disorderly conduct or even nuisance law. And even when you get through all that, if people will not agree to get along, they come back. It is a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kraus, how have you done handling neighbor disputes that are heading towards lawsuits?
Oh, as Mr. Kelly said, that these cases are very troubling. I handle the small claims docket. Several of those arise on there. Those are civil lawsuits that are stemming from these neighbor disputes. Paint sprayed on a car. Someone punched someone else out when they were mowing the lawn. And they live next door to each other. They live across the street. These cases also can move into housing violations because then they start reporting each other over. And these cases are really troubling for the court. And they and we have a mediator for the civil mediation that could sometimes help with that. And then the other things we can do is just try to get the parties to at least get along, sort of, while we take care of the underlying issues that they have going on. But they are definitely hard cases to determine. And actually, we have a case that no judge at the court can currently hear any cases involved with these people because they have such a history. So they both have to recuse.
Thank you. Mr. Burke, question again is the best way to handle me.
Okay, there you go.
What do you feel is the best way to handle neighbors' disputes?
I've represented a lot of these disputes and it's a lot of dysfunctional. It's not about money. I've had one in Rocky River where I was a defense attorney in North Olmsted where the neighbor would put up a witch because he didn't like the female client, and then we had cameras involved. And then I had one as a magistrate, literally, the issue was this neighbor was shoveling snow onto their driveway. Now, you say, why do they charge? Because they're calling the police 10 and 15 times to drain on resources. The answer to that is simply this: the court must engage them in mediation, because this becomes a drain not only in the police department to respond, but the court. And so I think the best chance of resolving it is court-ordered mediation. And that is where I've seen success so many times.
Thank you. Moving on to a question about money, starting with Ms. Kraus. Do you consider the decrease in revenue from the decrease in COVID cases positive or negative?
Well, it's definitely a negative. It's never good to operate, not operate under a profitable margin. However, we are seeing an increase in cases. I have the August accounting from the courts in front of me right now. And there is an increase of cases in some of the areas, so this should help. We're still at a deficit in 2023. It's not as bad as 2022 at this point. So I think that the court is going to continue to move forward with that. The case loads are coming back. Things seem to be much more normal as far as they were prior to COVID. And it's definitely going to help the court to have an increased caseload. They can't control how many cases we have, but they're, the officers are writing tickets again, and we're getting more criminal cases and traffic in because of that. So.
Thank you. Mr. Burke, do you have any comments on the decrease in revenue from the decrease in the cases during COVID?
First, as a general rule, there's only a handful of municipal courts in the state of Ohio that are solvent merely from fines and court costs, which means that the majority of community courts are operating at a deficit. That's just the fact of life. The North Olmsted Mayor's Court that you're all familiar with had a huge impact on our court because what it took is the low-lying fruit cases, the traffic offense cases, the first-time DUI cases. And I would say it's a pay-to-play system where you pay, usually get a better result. There's no probation. So that certainly had an impact. In terms of the revenue, yes, our case count is down. However, I did look at the annual report from 22. We just paid off the bond issue to the city of Rocky River. So there is an uptick in cases, but there's a fundamental belief with police officers, especially young ones, that they don't want to write as many tickets, that they want to be more of a community liaison. So that is a problem we're battling. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. I would like to approach this issue from a slightly different perspective. The challenge here is it's unavoidable to a degree, but what we're talking about here is it a good thing or a bad thing where the court's finances are and how that relates to caseload? Fines and costs, and this is an issues in other courts, need to be related only to the case that is in front of the jurist. They can't be, they should not be, based on a question of worrying about solvency. The challenge for the court is there are certain fixed costs that are going to be in place. And when you budget, as I've done for the city of Bay Village on our finance committee, you have to make certain assumptions. And those assumptions have been challenged in recent years thanks to the pandemic. Certainly there would be an expectation that things will level out. But if this continues long-term, you need to adjust your budget to reflect the reality of a reduced caseload, regardless of the mechanism of why, because you don't want to be doing it on the backs of the defendants. Thank you.
Thank you. This question will start with Mr. Burke and asks, what changes do you envision for Rocky River Municipal Court going forward?
As I was saying in my opening remarks, we have an ever-changing population. It's fluid. And when I look at the court, one thing I would like to improve is diversity, not only in our resources and the services, but the staff. The largest area population counties in North Olmsted, Westlake, and Rocky River, and they're not represented by the court. And I've talked to the community and they're like, well, Joe, I don't see anybody like me up there. I think that's a problem. I think the lack of diversity is certainly an issue that needs to be improved because we have an ever-changing demographic and we have to address those needs. People have to feel like the people that are in front of them in court that they're inclusive, that they're not, divisive prone. So I think for me, the number one change is some diversity in terms of services, in terms of immigration services, translation services, and so forth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I would echo Mr. Burke's remarks about diversity. The reality of it is if you look at the history of the court, you're going to find a bunch of white men and white women. But beyond that, what I would suggest to you is that you need to increase the availability of programs and other avenues that the court can utilize to try to help people. Let me step back. The longest sentence of jail that anyone can receive in a criminal matter that comes before this court is 6 months, even the most egregious offense. That means that before, during, and after these experiences, these individuals are going to be back in the community. They're going to be back living next to you. They're going to be back, at the stores and whatnot that you shop at. If we are going to have a safe community that we all continue to enjoy as we have in the past, we need to make sure that people receive the services they need so that they can go back to be law-abiding citizens and can improve themselves, can improve their family, and can improve everyone's outcome for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kraus, what changes do you envision for Rocky River Municipal Court?
Well, I agree with my colleague, Mr. Kelly. Certainly an increase in services for mental health. I see that as a basis for many of the crimes that occur. These are minor crimes, and mental health issues lead to misunderstandings with police. It causes more charges to be filed, and the crimes themselves are often not that terrible, but they're hard on the community. They're things that are a burden on the community. So more mental health service. I also see that we have a need for increased accessibility. Technology is not going away. And there's grants, the Supreme Court has technology grants. I would look to that. I see it of an area where we could do have more technology, more Zoom hearings would be arraignments. People there are usually either continuing to get an attorney or getting a small traffic ticket. And then finally, I would have more access, more docket times, some flexibility in that, an evening docket, and perhaps a Spanish language docket.
Thank you. Starting with Mr. Kelly, how would you ensure consistency in sentencing regardless of race, gender, socioeconomic status?
I don't know if the questioner is familiar with this or not. I know this discussion has been taking place more broadly. I want to say it was Justice Donnelly with the Ohio Supreme Court, who I've had the pleasure of practicing in front of back when he was in Cuyahoga County. But yeah, the idea of there being some type of database, sentencing database, for two reasons. One, so that you can see whether or not you're being consistent, and two, if you're not, that there is some rational basis that you can demonstrate as to why one particular situation merited an outcome versus another. It's incredibly important. In the absence of that, yes, there is the underlying issue that you want the jurors to be able to exercise their judgment and their experience to ensure that they are matching the outcome to these particular facts. But there needs to be an ability for everyone to see some transparency and to know that things are being handled equitably. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kraus, can you please address the question of consistency in sentencing?
Absolutely. What I see is that the sentences are actually fairly consistent, at least when we're doing it now. The only difference that would sometimes occur is perhaps in the fines and costs. If you have a defendant in front of you with an ability to pay, that sentence may, you're not going to always get rid of the fine and cost on that one. Whereas sometimes if people are so stacked up with fines and costs, you're going to maybe allow more leniency in that, or at least time to pay. So to give them time to make that up, because they have that difference in economic circumstance, and you don't want to overburden people for what are actually misdemeanor crimes. As far as other crimes such as OBIs, that's a pretty standard sentencing, no matter who they are or who's in front of you.
Thank you. Mr. Burke?
So Tom and I have done a lot of defense work, and the biggest issue here is different courts having inconsistent. And Tom and I could tell you about certain courts which have a harsher sentencing, let's say OBIs, than a court up here. And I think it's a problem. It's a problem when you see it. I have the benefit of seeing these inconsistencies. The solution, there is a movement afoot that these sentences should all be databased and cataloged so that everyone can see it. I think that's the only way to get consistency, not only in the particular court, but in courts in Northeastern Ohio, so that citizens can see what judge is doing what. What's wrong with transparency? I absolutely agree with that. And that's one of the biggest issues that defendants face is they have different justice in different courts.
Thank you. Wow. Starting with Ms. Kraus, we touched a little bit on technology, and certainly for all of us, the technology we're using now in terms of just cell phones is so different, and so it must be the same with computer and data. And can you explain what are your ideas for using technology to help the court run more efficiently?
Sure, I think I touched on it in a prior answer that, I think that Zoom for arraignments would be really helpful in a lot of instances. Those are quick hearings where you have a room just like this, basically, full of people that have come with a variety of charges. If they have a more severe charge that would involve a jail sentence, then they're basically usually going to continue their case to get an attorney, whether it's assigned or appointed for them. So that could be done by Zoom. They could get that attorney. Sometimes they're often not from this jurisdiction. They're from out of city or maybe even out of state. Another area
Speaking, when you say they, are you talking about the defendants?
the defendants that are appearing, yes. Another area that I would love to look into is Garfield Heights Court does this, and it is an evidence database, and then everyone could access it, the defense attorneys, the prosecutors, the court. And that would really be a great way to share resources and would lead to court efficiency. And as I said, the Supreme Court has technology grants, and those are things we could look into.
Thank you. Mr. Burke, how would you envision using technology?
Well, I think the court already utilizes technology, and we have utilized Zoom. We did it during COVID, and it's a case by case basis. Here's the problem. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago in the news, when people were appearing by Zoom, there was a defendant with a temporary protection order not to see a victim. And they discovered on that video that he was actually in the house with the victim. So that's a problem. It's a problem when you need to cross-examine somebody. You can't cross-examine a Zoom video. So I think it's a time and a place issue. We certainly use it when we arraign prisoners. I think we might be able to use it for pretrial appearances, but when you get into substantive things in certain cases, it just doesn't work.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Technology in the court?
I would largely echo what my colleagues have already said, that you know, I don't want to say there's nothing new under the sun, but for a question like this, yeah, it's about implementing more video. It's about, I agree with Mr. Burke in terms of, you know, it should be for more procedural matters as opposed to evidentiary hearings. There is an opportunity, I think, to do it for pleas and whatnot, but still the question on any of these, the challenge is trying to ferret out the bottlenecks. There are any number of examples I could bore you with because a lot of it's very technical, but in terms of where things get caught up. And for example, you know, each city only has one part-time prosecutor. So when you're dealing with them, that becomes a bottleneck in terms of getting the throughput of the cases. So you want to ensure that you get stuff set up ahead of time. And if we are setting expectations rather than working on a day-by-day basis, you should be able to do that with those same tools. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question starts with Mr. Burke. Do you have, aside from technology, do you have a specific one or two items that you see would improve the municipal?
Okay. From the defendant's perspective or the court's perspective?
I think it would be from the perspective of the judicial, the judge, and that would follow through to the rest of people that are acting in front of the court.
Well, it was about a number of years ago, we started electronic filing. It first started in Cuyahoga County, and that was huge. That people didn't have to come into the court and file. I would say right now, the biggest problem in Rocky River Municipal Court is if you ever tried to file something, the software they're using is very clunky, very not user-friendly, very difficult. So you have to file electronically, but I know my office, and I've been doing this for 31 years. We have to call up several times and say, it didn't take it. I think there absolutely needs to be an overhaul of the entire database in the software system of the Rocky River Court. I think Judge Hagan has admitted to me it's antiquated. You look at the website, it looks like it's from the 1990s. That would be the biggest thing. I think that would help the court tremendously.
Mr. Kelly, what one or two items would you see to improve the court?
Joe took the best one. That is great, and it's true. You have no sense of it until you have to start living this stuff. We're in an era now where everybody is trying to get leaner. That's why we're talking about all this video stuff. A great way to do that is through being able to e-file. And some of these places have implemented it. it's not revolutionary, but it would be tremendously assistive if we could get to the latest and the greatest, or even, a couple years back from the latest and the greatest. Secondarily, I still see a day, based on how things are going, that more nonviolent drug offenses are going to be coming to the municipal court. I think that's going to change dramatically the caseload. You guys may recall that a few years ago, the state legislature was looking at maybe adjusting some of the levels of offense. If that happens, then we need to reevaluate everything. There's going to change budgets. It's going to change the need to access to services. It's going to change where cases are done.
Thank you. Ms. Kraus?
I absolutely have to agree with the e-filing system. I've e-filed all over the county and ours is the worst, the clunkiest. We also don't have internet, the court, or very, very spotty internet. So people are trying to pull up their insurance when they're in a hearing on their phone, and it takes forever to show up. So that's certainly a goal. And I also agree with Mr. Kelly in that I'm already seeing that drug offenses that are nonviolent, or maybe one pill or one something, instead of being felony level, are becoming an attempt, and they're keeping them in Rocky River Municipal Court. We're going the other way with domestic violence because there's a new strangulation law on the books. So the domestic violence, more of those are being put on downtown, but they have a domestic violence docket there. So that's probably a proper place for these more violent domestic violence cases.
Thank you. Starting with Mr. Kelly, how would you balance public safety with an accused's need for treatment and repeat OVI offenders?
Thank you for the question. Recall that the first couple of OVIs, the first couple of DUIs are at a municipal court level. But once you've, I don't want to say achieved, but once things have gotten bad enough that you continue to act out in this fashion, and then they end up downtown, they become felonies. There are certain mandatory minimum sentences that attach to these matters, such that you're going to end up with the individual in jail for some period of time as you move through. Second offense, they're at least in there a couple of weeks, even if they're on electronic monitor house arrest after that. You're looking at least like a month if you're on your third. So how do you balance it? They're going away for at least a period of time. They're going to be subject to their car being restrained. They're going to be subject to a breathalyzer machine on their car. There's the reality of it is the law on that particular subject is actually pretty strong as we sit here today.
Thank you. Ms. Kraus? Public safety with the need for treatment, OV repeat offenders.
Yes, I agree with what Mr. Kelly said. We do see that. We'll see people that have maybe 3. That's pretty much what you'll max out at in the muni court. But they will, they will serve their mandatory time. However, it's not that long, and it will become partially jail, partially electronically monitored house arrest. But you may not be able to deter the behavior. They may be in rehab. You may not be able to. But what you can do is put them on scram that detects drinking. That means they can't drink. And if they drink, they'll be reported to probation and then becomes an ever mounting set of violations. You can restrain them from driving, of course, by a long license suspension until they prove otherwise. If they have driving privileges, it will be with interlock so that they could not drive their car if they were inebriated. And that's how you can, then long probation as well. So they're subject to a random screening, and they're meeting with probation to see how they're doing. The goal is that, of course, if they can achieve some rehabilitation.
Thank you. Mr. Burke?
I handled all of the DUS, driving under suspension, OVI privileges for Judge Hagan in the 5 years I was there. I had to track them. And let me say this, when you get into second and third offenses, there's mandatory minimums. You have an ALS suspension. You can't get any driving privileges for the first 90 days, and then you won't be able to get a license. I would say this with sincerity, the court takes it very seriously. If you're a repeat OVI offender, you're not going to have a license to drive. You may not even have privileges to drive. Here's the problem. Defendants still drink, okay? Defendants still drink. So our job is to make sure they're not a threat to other people, but we can't prevent people who don't have a valid license from, getting on the road. So I think we do balance the public safety, but it's something we always worry about. When it's a repeat offender, that they're gonna kill somebody. But the court does a really good job of ensuring they don't even have a license, or if they have privileges, it's with interlock with an ankle bracelet that detects alcohol.
Thank you. And I've come to the last question of the night, and it's a good one, as they all have been. Ms. Kraus, what is one quality you have that you would like to highlight that would make you a good judge?
Experience and a judicial temperament. I'm already basically doing the job. As a magistrate, you are an assistant, basically an assistant judge. I've worked for both judges. I get along with everyone at the court. I could move into this role seamlessly. I would continue to expand the role. And I have the temperament to carry on the legacy of the venerable Judge Fitzsimmons and continue to work with Judge Hagan and the probation department and the court staff. I think I could bring consistency, and I have a record of public service that would, I love what I do. I would like to continue doing it, and I would like to continue improving and the court having the best court for the people of this community.
Thank you. Mr. Burke, what's one quality you have you'd like to highlight?
My experience, I've been a lawyer for 31 years. I have a broad-based experience. I practiced regularly in Rocky River Court for 20 years before I became a magistrate. And then I was a magistrate, so I have the same experience that Karen does. I also serve clerkships. And I think that judicial temperament, I love everybody at the court. Let me say this though, and Judge Fitzsimmons has been a great judge, but I think it's time for a fresh perspective. It's a different community out there, and that's not putting her down. I think it's time for a change. I think if somebody could look at it a little bit differently, who's perhaps got a defense background. I think it's time. It's been good. 30 years is a good long run, but I think it's time to, recognize that our community is much different. We have to respond to the people that are appearing in front of us. We have to be more diverse as a court. We're not diverse. So those are some of the issues. So, but getting back to my experience.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. What one quality that you have would you like to highlight for this election?
One quality, servant leadership. Too often when you have someone who's a judge, it's very easy to lose sight of your responsibility to the public. What I have seen repeatedly over time is those people who were able to remain humble, remain engaged, not become aloof or detached as a result of the unique position they are placed in when they become a judge. The ability to empathize and engage with the public is incredibly critical if you are going to be asked to make decisions like this that affect people's lives. And that's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you. It's time now for closing statements that are 2 minutes long for each candidate. We started with Mr. Burke, and this time we'll start at the other end with Ms. Kraus for 2 minutes.
Again, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. It's been a real privilege to be here with the League of Women Voters and the audience participation. I am the independent candidate for this for the judicial position at Rocky River Municipal Court. As an independent, I felt that was a good place for me to be because that is my personal perspective. I vote on candidates and issues depending on the candidate and issue. I don't vote on party lines. And that's much how a judge decides cases. I would bring that independence of spirit and I would be impartial. I am experienced. I work at the court. I've been there 7 years. That's more than a judicial term. So I do bring a lot of experience. I strongly attached to this community as a lifelong member. Its safety and integrity is paramount to me. And my goal is to create the best court for this community by continuing to work with everyone that I work with to bring to implement some change as far as technology and increased mental health awareness. And I just ask that you think of me in November. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly, your 2-minute closing statement, please.
Thank you. And again, thank you all for coming this evening. I'm Thomas J. Kelly. I too am a candidate for Rocky River Municipal Court Judge. I would ask that you look us all up, that you look at Judge for yourself, that you look at the candidates' websites, that you see what everybody's history is and decide for yourself. I recognize that while I want to say to you, look at this, or look at this piece of my experience, or this opportunity I was privileged to have, you each are your own jury in this case. You each get to decide who to vote for based on whatever factor you find to be the most important. I would like to say to you that based on my municipal experience, that respectfully, I don't think my opponents can match. I'd like you to look at that. I'd like you to look at who's endorsing me. But I'm hopeful that you just look at everything in the totality of those circumstances, and you won't go wrong. You'll pick the candidate who suits you and thinks it's best for the community for you. Where am I at?
I think you're at about 30 seconds.
I'm done.
You're 1:16.
All right, so here, so then I got. Great.
2.
So beyond that, I've got some personal experience with my family that I don't like to touch on too much. But the reality of it is it's important to be able to know that there are challenges people are facing that are visible and some that are invisible. And it's important that whoever is selected for this position can reflect upon that when they're asked to make decisions that are so vital to us all. Thank you very much. Thomas J. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. 2 minutes.
Let me say this. We are a community court. And I've walked now 600 miles in the 5 communities since April. And what I found, whether R and D, is that most people are concerned about crime and safety. Now, we're a community court. We have not so serious offenses, but we're not the same community we were 10 or 15 years ago. There was a murder in North Olmsted. There was one a street away from my office in Fairview Park. So there is an increase in crime, and people chose these communities because they like the school system, they want to raise their family. So we have to be attuned to that. We can't ignore it. It's not the idyllic place it was. I think a community court is more important than a common police court because we're on the front lines. And I've personally seen lives change as a magistrate. If I can get an individual who's alcohol or drug addicted, I can get them into treatment early before they commit another serious offense. I can change the arc of their life. And that's what a community court judge does. A good judge exercises compassion and firmness and the wisdom to know the difference. When you get down to common police court, you usually get a big record and the offenses are more serious. So when I say we're on the front lines, this is where we can get those defendants before it becomes more serious. So I have the experience. Grew up in Bay. I lived in North Olmsted. I live in River. I worked in Westlake. I live in Burke. This is my community. I'm here because I want to serve. I have the ability. I have the skills to serve. I can use those ability to help people. And ultimately, that's what the court's about. We're a community court, and people just want to make sure that they're heard and they're respected. And they want to make sure that justice is consistent throughout. So please look at Judge for yourself. Look at my record. I haven't talked about all that stuff, but I'm here because I'm committed to this community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You know, a forum like this, where these judges are bombarded with questions on different topics, doesn't happen very often in the course of a campaign, does it? So these candidates, we are very lucky that they have given up their time and told us their record and what they think. Please join me in thanking them. I'm going to turn it now and thank you, audience, for very insightful questions. It's been a wonderful night. I'm going to turn it back to Nadia.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you to all the candidates. We are very grateful that you took the time tonight to come and talk to us and answer questions from voters. I also want to thank some of our volunteers tonight. The chair of the Bay Village chapter, Cynthia White, who's in the back. My co-chair, Kathy Woolner from Westlake, North Olmsted. The voter service chair, for Westlake, North Olmsted, Bruce Robinson. And then Carrie Eckel, the voter service chair from Bay, I was not able to attend tonight, but I want to thank her as well for helping to organize it. And then, of course, Peter, I know who's doing the reporting for us tonight. All other volunteers who helped run around gathering questions and greeting people as they came in. I want to remind you that election day is November 7th. But the last day to register is this coming Monday, October 9th. And then early voting will begin the following day, October 10th. That's in person or by mail. We encourage you to make a plan to vote, whether that's early in person, by mail, or on election day. If you need help changing your address or filling out a vote by mail application, we have volunteers outside who can help you with that. They can also answer any questions you have about the voting process. Since, as some of you may know, there have been changes over the last year. I would also encourage you to check out Vote 411, which is our nonpartisan voter guide, where you can read about the issues and the candidates that are on your ballot, so you can make better informed decisions. And as I mentioned, this forum has been recorded, so please be sure to share that recording with your friends and family who are not able to attend tonight. Thank you again, and thank you to all our candidates.